Hello and welcome to the Nordvig Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello, everyone. So this time we don't have any guests or anything. It's just us talking about the things that, come to mind.
We haven't got a set plan as such for this one.
No, we figured we didn't want to bother people over like the holidays and everything between Christmas and New Year's. So it's just us.
We've got some good guests for after the new year, though.
Yeah, we definitely do. So Daniel, what have you been up to?
Good Christmas. Ate a lot, the usual. And then I guess just putting up with the usual assholes on Instagram, Facebook, that kind of thing. Obviously, anyone that follows Horns of Odin will know that we recently released our winter range, and we decided to use a model who is mixed race. And you know how Viking bros get, some of them don't quite like that, and we get all the comments of this guy's culturally appropriate in our culture. Everything from that to people just dropping monkey symbols in and whatever else.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No, I have to be on it to just kind of block, delete, because I'm not giving any sort of platform to people like that. So I don't even reply to it. They just get blocked, deleted. And, that's it, because what's the point? If I start engaging, then you soon start giving platform to hate, which is not what we're about.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to hear that. That sucks.
It's fucking ridiculous. I woke up last night to one guy who was like, "Oh, this is a bit confusing. It's a Viking company with a guy who's got a cross tattooed, because the model's got like a little cross tattooed on his cheek." And I just like, what? Like, you can't separate like the Viking age from Christianity in any possible way.
No.
Anyone who's listening to this podcast now knows, the two are entwined like anything. So it's like, fuck off with that. And secondly, it's 2020. We're just a clothing company, and I like the model has got a good look.
Yeah. Like, what the fuck?
It's honestly, it's absolutely insane. Some people are just assholes.
Yeah, definitely.
Cultural appropriation is definitely one that seems to be popping up more and more, the one that I'm kind of seeing, because we've used black models a couple of times before, and that is the one that people like to throw. And I don't know if it's kind of this idea that some people want to try and flip it around almost and be like, oh, well, you're appropriating white culture, and it's like, oh, fuck off, man, it's just culture for everyone.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and it's also, you can only say that when you also then like employ some kind of like logical disconnect. Like, first of all, the physical features of a human being has nothing to do with culture. First of all, you can be, black, white, whatever, and culturally identify with, for instance, British culture or Scandinavian culture or German culture, whatever you works for you, first of all. And secondly, of course, also what is like, if you've grown up in Germany and your skin color is black, you're still German. Like, come on.
Absolutely, of course.
And the same in Denmark, the same in Norway, Sweden, the UK. Like, so anybody who would say anything else, they can shut the fuck up. And but aside from that, I mean, the whole thing of cultural appropriation is actually a legal thing more than anything. What we're dealing with is, as cultural appropriation when it first came out as a concept, is actually
I don't think I'd even heard of it like 10 years ago.
No, well, it was in existence 10 years ago, but it is a fairly new term. The whole thing about cultural appropriation is actually that this is a incredibly important situation for a lot of indigenous peoples, especially Native Americans, whose design patterns and other cultural products are being taken by companies, copied, and then mass produced and sold to the general consumer. And what that means is then that something that belongs to tribes, that tribes consider their particular cultural expression is then being mass produced. And the best example, I think, is the Navajo prints, those like prints that you will see on a lot of like sort of like Indian branded clothing. I think H&M had some different clothing companies here in the US have had some, and the Navajo Nation are like, hey, what the fuck? This is stuff that we hand quilt, we weave, we put this pattern as a very distinct marker of our tribe on material that we sell to tourists, and this is what we fucking live off, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you have cultural appropriation as legitimate terminology, because this is where you didn't have some company that just goes, well, I'll just snatch that and then I'll make a fuck ton of money off of it, and screw these guys who've invented it, right?
Yeah, for sure. We can all see that that's completely wrong, and in that case, that's where it's needed.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where you then have court cases where people basically bring these lawsuits and say, well, we want cut of the deal, which I think is only fair. And that's very, very different from you making modern Viking branded clothing and then some person that's not like pasty looking and like you and me. Where is it? That's not cultural appropriation.
Yeah, it's unbelievably ridiculous. I say I've had personal messages from people of all different sort of backgrounds, ethnicities, who said, thank you for using not just the typical white, blonde-haired, muscular man for a model. Like, it does mean something to people, and it helps them feel a little bit more invited into the community, because it can be quite overwhelming, I guess, to some people with how some kind of like the white supremacy side of people act.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it's incredibly important. I think if you don't agree with white supremacists, and I never think you should, by the way, I think it's incredibly important to then also be inclusive in the ways that work, and if you walk down the street of any Western European city nowadays, you will find that there's a lot of diversity. We're a lot of different kinds of people. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, there's also nothing wrong with these different kinds of people. Then also relating to the historical past of the particular countries that they're in and have grown up in and belong to. I can't even disconnect that.
It's absolutely insane. I think it's also fair to remember there's a big difference between a cultural appropriation and appreciation. There's a huge difference between the two. Like our model, his Instagram handle is the Maori Viking. He enjoys Viking culture, enjoys Norse mythology. It's not just somebody who's picked up off the street either that's decided to do it. You know what I mean? He has a great appreciation for this culture. So it seems insane that anyone would disagree to us using him as a model, especially when he looks as good as he does.
Yeah. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, why not appreciate other cultures? There's so much good stuff in the world, and why do you have to stick to whatever was made by certain, like by quote unquote your skin color or your culture? Like, why do you have to stick to your little groups? Why not all appreciate each other's work?
Exactly, and that's the thing. And if you want to get nitpicky about this, like some of my Black Danish friends have more Scandinavian genes than some of those Scandinavian heritage dudes from Minnesota that I've run into once in a while. Like, think about that, guys, before you start bitching about this stuff. Like, it's just nonsense. Like, cut it out, just drop it.
Yeah, I mean, there we go. That's our rant. We haven't had one for a while.
That's true. We haven't had one for a while.
So I guess just before we get started into the bulk of the episode, it's worth saying we're spending a little bit of time at the minute on getting a new Instagram out there for the podcast. So if you guys want to sort of follow that, it's just the Nordic Mythology Podcast on Instagram, and also the Facebook page is going to be more active, which is the Nordic Mythology Podcast on Facebook, and now we've moved up in the world and got a producer. He's going to be taking care of posting stuff on both of them and making sure that we get good quality content out there. We'll still be sharing stuff on Horns of Odin, but the posts are going to be backed up by supplementary evidence to support the episodes, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, and it's a little bit of a work, like trying to migrate everything and integrate and so on. I mean, I started both Facebook page and YouTube and all that stuff under the Nordic Mythology channel, and we're basically remodeling that so that it fits the Nordic Mythology podcast brand instead, and so we don't start from scratch either. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yes, definitely an exciting one. Everyone, if you follow it, it's just literally the Nordic Mythology podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and it's just going to help you keep up with what we're doing and when the new episodes go live. Like I say, there's going to be supplementary evidence on there for each episode, so it's definitely going to be a bonus. One last thing I guess to say before we jump into the show, I had a message just before we started from a gentleman who you must have come across my personal Instagram. And he was like, I've been listening to this show for 25 episodes, and I thought you were just going to look like kind of a standard, I guess, kind of boring British guy, like a run-of-the-mill. He was like, I did not expect you to look the way you do. And I mean, I'm not quite sure how to take it, whether to be flattered or not. He said I look like a Viking, I guess, which is quite complimentary.
So what is a standard British guy? Is that some dude with a
bowler hat?
Yeah, and a tracksuit?
Yeah, bowler hat, or like a pork pie hat and a suit and a cane would be like the Londoner. And right. Then I guess as you go north, it would be a shell suit with the Adidas stripe down the side. And I guess that would be the typical Brit. Yeah,
no, I mean, by the way, I am waiting for my Adidas suit to arrive. Just it wasn't.
So there you go. If anybody does want to know what I look like, I guess you can look on my Instagram, which is Daniel_Farrand1. If you're interested, I guess. So yeah, I mean, let's jump into the bulk of this episode, which is gaming, drinking, partying.
It is that time of the year, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I've done a little bit too much drinking so far, so probably going to carry on into the new year as well.
Yeah, that's how it goes, right?
For sure, especially when everyone seems to buy me whiskey.
Oh, that's not a bad thing, though.
No, definitely not. I tend to get the Highland Park one, which is kind of very it's made from Orkney. And it's all very Nordic themed. So I think people see that and think, I know who will like this.
Yeah. They used to sell those with some kind of like wooden Viking themed holder. I believe I got a bottle like that once. It was delicious.
I think so. They do some really cool bottles.
Yeah.
I mean, I like whiskey, so if anybody ever wants to buy me whiskey, feel free to send one over. This episode is me just trying to get people to
send you whiskey.
To send me whiskey, say nice things to me on Instagram. It's very
boost his ego, guys. Also, by the way, I think maybe Highland Park should consider sponsoring us since we're basically advertising for them right now.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. So I guess the one thing I wanted to ask is this whole idea of drinking games in the Viking Age. I've just started playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and one of the things you can do on there is drinking challenges. Mm-hmm. So how accurate is that? Because drinking mead, ale in abundance out of horns goes very much with this idea of kind of like your typical Viking image.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we got to start with bros will be bros, right? I mean, this is definitely something that men tend to do, and regardless of culture, by the way, you find that any culture that uses alcohol will also at some point come up with a stupid drinking game, and probably also other stupid ideas like we should buy a bar. Yes, we should buy a bar. Yeah. A bar that never close. Those kinds of things, right? Things you can only come up with when you're drunk.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have several examples in the saga literature from Iceland, where you find like competitive drinking in different ways. We also have from Nordic mythology. We did that episode on Thor's journey to Utgaraloki, and that's where you find like the prime example of a quote unquote drinking game or this situation where there's like a competition of drinking involved and eating, by the way, too. So we have Thor, right, who is known as a drinker. We find him in other stories as well, like the story where he goes to Thrymheim, to Thrymer, where he has to dress up as Freya to pretend to marry Thrymer. That's also where we see a reference to him being capable of drinking a lot, right? So that's his thing. That's part of him being very manly, I guess. I think we can safely say that this comes with the idea of masculinity as well.
I always wonder how on earth could Thor dressing as a woman ever pass as being Freya? Because Freya is obviously described as being extremely beautiful, and I'm like, how does that even? Because obviously you think of Thor as being this big macho man. I'm like, how can that even work?
I think it was not so long ago I was seeing this meme circulating with Thor and Loki, like these two. I don't even know. I think it's from a sitcom or something like that. These two very bulky dudes dressed up as women.
Yeah. I think I saw the same one.
Yeah, so I mean, the deal is, of course, it's comedy. So of course, you should be thinking of a very muscular, like manly man looking kind of dude dressed as a woman, right? And that's the hilarious part about it, right?
So basically, go on my Instagram and then imagine me in a dress.
Yes.
I think that would put it in place.
So anyway, going back to the drinking thing, I mean, there's there's this general knowledge that the Thor is like he can really like empty a lot of beers, a lot of caskets even of beers, and we then have the story where he goes to Utgaraloki and he is challenged. Utgaraloki says, "Empty my drinking horn." He calls that horn Vitishornit, which means the Punisher horn. So there's also, I
feel like there's marketing there for me,
right?
there is some marketing there,
and that's so that's like it when you can just like casually throw that into a story like Snorri Sturluson does in Edda. That means, of course, that it's a very normal part of the culture, right? It's like, think of all the things that you can just casually throw into a conversation when you talk with people. That's, of course, the stuff that we all share and all know to be generally true or generally something that we do, something like that, right? So that also means then that we must assume that these Icelanders back in the day, they were very familiar with getting shit-faced and also competitively getting shit-faced.
So does that mean, I guess, listening to those sagas, you would assume that there is some sort of prowess and kind of you would looked favorably on if you could drink a lot?
Definitely. And that's the thing. So we have the last episode we talked a little bit about Hrungnir, who ends up in Ausgarður, where he gets really shit-faced too, right? He can't hold his drink. That's part of the social codes in that story where like he's sort of like, because he's racing with Odin, he accidentally finds himself in the middle of Ausgarður, and then the cultural codes stipulate that they have to welcome him, treat him as a as a guest and serve him alcohol, and then he like keeps drinking and gets drunker and drunker, and then he starts like throwing insults and threats around and all that stuff, and that leads to a duel. So there he starts breaking the social code. So there is a social code that you shouldn't be a dick, right? That's really what it means. And
I was going to quiz you on your Havamal knowledge, because isn't there a line in that where Odin kind of says, "Don't drink too much"?
Yeah, there are multiple. There are multiple lines in there, and this sort of like goes a little against what we're otherwise seeing in the mythology. Multiple situations where Odin says, "Don't drink too much. Nobody's going to reproach you just if you go to bed early." He very much cautions against drinking. I think it's one of the themes that it might be the theme that shows up the most in Havamal, actually. Like so repeats over and over. Don't drink too much. Don't get too drunk. Don't be a jerk when you get too drunk. Those kinds of things. So that says a lot about how the culture relates to that as well. But then you go to the mythology, and then you see these examples of individuals who break those codes, and sometimes they get away with it, sometimes they don't. Hrungnir ends not getting away with it, of course. Lokasenna, the Loki's quarrel, as it is called, this poem where Loki is basically throwing insults at everybody at a feast, is also an instance where Loki seems to have had too much to drink. That's sort of like the premise that comes in the beginning of the story. He gets kicked out of the party, and he comes back in, and he's like, "Well, you suck, and fuck you," and like that kind of stuff. So yeah. It's all over the mythology, actually.
So, is that a case of, I guess, if in Havamal they're saying don't drink too much, and in the mythology it's showing people drinking a lot, is that kind of you're seen well if you can drink a lot, but also equally handle it and not make a dick of yourself, and you're kind of seen well in that light. But if you drink a lot and end up embarrassing yourself, then it seems like a very fine balance.
I think there's a part of that present in the culture. It's not like abstinence is preferred. You should definitely engage in drinking. Otherwise, like say you come to somebody's house and they offer you a drink and you refuse. That I'm pretty sure would have been considered an insult, because like you basically like, what, my beer's not good enough for you, and also by the way, offering like really bad brewed beer, or not offering beer at all is also an insult. That's something we'll get to in a second. I just want to round the thing out with the mythology, because we also have the idea in the mythology, especially in skaldic poetry, and the idea of skaldic poetry, that this all comes, like the capacity to create awesome poetry comes from drinking. The meat of poetry, right, is the story about how the ability to compose good poetry comes straight from getting drunk. And the story about how Odin retrieves the meat of poetry in Edda, right, is also a story about perhaps getting so drunk that you have to throw up, right? That's what he does in the end. And he actually soils himself on both ends. To be honest.
I was going to say, I don't know if you want to tell the story briefly. I know it can be quite long, but we can
just
skim over it. We can speak about it. It is an interesting story, and it is probably one of the most famous ones as well.
It is, yeah. So it begins with, so just to give you a sense of like how important this story actually is, at least in Snorri Sturluson's universe. It begins with the truce that is settled between the Aesir and the Vanir. So this is like in the beginning of time too, like very early on in like the cosmic time. The mead is created as the Aesir and Vanir come together to spit in this giant vat or tub or whatever you want to call it, and then that they create a man from that, Kvasir, and he's like,
I always find these bits so bizarre.
yeah, but when you brew mead, on the other hand, actually it starts making sense, because that residue that the yeast makes, the yeast lies at the top of the liquid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that looks like spit.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And then it makes residue that comes to the bottom. So it actually makes a lot of sense. But
There's always this idea, I guess, of people spitting on their hands and shaking hands as well. It's some sort of brotherly tie. So I guess if it is like a truce between all the people, it's like, let's all spit in here and no one's ever going to break that oath.
Exactly, and I think I also mentioned before that this is actually also a very old, well-known way of making alcohol, like spitting in it, because there's something with the enzymes in spit. Yeah,
I guess it'll be the bacteria as well.
Yeah, it's all part of a beautiful microbial environment that'll get you drunk.
Wow.
So yeah, that's part of it too. But yeah, so they create this man, or the Aesir, they create this man called Kvasir from the spittle. He walks around in the entire world, and then he ends up at the dwarfs' place. So these two dwarfs called Fjalar and Galar, and we should assume then that he's underground, because dwarfs live underground, right? And that means effectively that he's gone to the underworld, to the world of the dead, and there. Turned into he gets murdered, and then he's turned into mead. The dwarfs use his blood for mead, and then we have a whole lot of things happening with the giants, and eventually the mead ends up in the possession of the giant Suttungur, who keeps it in the bottom of a mountain called Nordvig, which means clashing rocks. And this is where he places his daughter Gunnlöð in charge of it, and that's like the key, the cue for Odin to show up, right? It's like, oh, a lady and some booze, I need to go there. So that's what happens next. Odin shows up to take the mead, and he finally, gains access to the bottom of the mountain. He turns into a snake and crawls through a hole that he has made in collaboration with Suttung's brother Bögi. And he comes down there into the bottom of the mountain. The mountain, at this point, we should realize, since he's turned into a snake, snakes are, when we look at the cosmology, usually hanging out in the underworld. They're hanging out by the roots of Yggdrasil and all that stuff. So we should realize here that the mountain basically represents the vertical axis of the cosmos. So he's like turned into a snake to go to the bottom of the cosmos. This is where he then copulates with Gunnlöð. And since Gunnlöð hangs out there in that underworld, we should consider her the same figure, more or less, at least conceptually, as the goddess Hel. So like she's the ruler of the underworld. So Odin has to turn into a snake to go visit the ruler of the underworld. He has to have sex with her, and then he can get this very potent drink that he then gobbles up in 3 swigs, and then he turns into an eagle and flies out of the mountain. And again, this is very cosmic, right? Because the eagle sits at the top of the tree as well. So he goes on that axis to the bottom of the cosmos and then to the top of the cosmos. And then he brings the mead to the Aesir in Ausgarda, and also to the all these skalds, these poets who get the who basically have a hotline to the gods when they compose poetry. That's what it means to have the mead of poetry. So what it also means then is that once you drink from that well, so to speak, then you have cosmic knowledge, and that's what you need when you compose skaldic poetry, because we have all these kenningar, these circumlocutions that use Nordic mythology and like ways of like employing analogies and euphemisms for the things that you're talking about, and you need to basically know the cosmos to do that. So it's also a very like sort of religious thing to be doing, actually, in context of that Viking Age universe.
I always think it's so strange just thinking how you kind of get these big brutish Viking kind of ideas of this image in your mind, and then they all speak in poetry. Just I guess that, you know, they don't always speak in poetry, but it's just that idea that like the skaldic poetry is so important. It's kind of like it doesn't marry up, I guess, in like modern ideals of what you would think of the two. I always think of like a poet as kind of as like a slam poet with the high turtleneck, the black high turtleneck on, and a bongo,
and like little round glasses.
Yeah, exactly, and they're probably purple.
Yeah, no, that's a very recent occurrence, actually. Like, you know, back in the day, poetry was considered very masculine. And your greatest example of this is, of course, Egill Skallagrimsson, my favorite Viking, to be honest. Like his story, the saga of Egill Skallagrimsson, is probably my favorite saga, I would say. Yeah, it's my favorite. Yeah.
Okay.
And he's a warrior poet. That's okay. Like that is his thing. If you have not read this story, you should read it. There are some scholars who've suggested that it's actually Snorri Sturluson who has also written that. This can't be verified. None of the sagas actually have attached authors to them. So we can't really identify who initially wrote it. But there's a lot of overlap in both historical knowledge in the saga of Egill, and in other material that Snorri Sturluson might have written, like the King's sagas, for instance, and also a lot of overlap with Nordic mythology. I would say, is the saga short enough for you to tell us, or give us? It's actually quite long. It's quite long because it covers his whole life, and also bits and pieces of his offspring. So unfortunately, it's quite long. But we can. Okay. We'll make sure that we put a link to it on the Instagram page when we post the episode, or some way of finding it so people can read and kind of check up on it after. Yeah, no, that it's available in both in English and in multiple other languages on the internet, so it's pretty easy to find. But there are some key elements of the story that are very important. Like, first of all, it is sort of like a genius. I think he composes a poem, a skaldic poem, at the age of 3 or something like that. Like, you know, he starts off like that. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting backstory to him. His family. His family has a sort of a dark side. So his grandfather was known as Kveldulver. That means night wolf, because in the evenings he would get like mad, like he would go crazy. So the closer we get to sundown, the more likely the psycho will come out in him, and he'll try to start killing people and all that stuff. This seems to be sort of a reference to the old ideas of berserkir and like warrior madness of various kinds. And, you know, you could dig a lot into, like, is this some sort of like mental illness that they're actually talking about? Is this PTSD? Like, you know, there's plenty of ways you can go with actually discussing what is actually behind this. But of course, in this story, it's more to explain just how much of a psycho Egill Skallagrimsson is too. I think that's interesting that you mentioned PTSD, and just to take a quick detour, it's something I guess I've never really thought of, but when you're in this world, this hyper violent world, especially if you go raiding, and you know, it's a lot more violent as well than war today, in the sense of that you're not just shooting somebody through, you know, down the sight of a gun or pressing a button from a drone. It's very much personal. You know, you're hitting somebody with an axe or a sword or any other sharp object. I guess, you know, it's going to be pretty horrific. You're going to see
it's not like it is on the films either. You know, I guess the sword doesn't always go perfectly straight through, or the arm come off clean. You know what I mean? It's not like Hollywood portrays it very, even though it can be quite chaotic, it's very clean as a war. And even the most gruesome ones, I'm sure, don't do justice to what war actually was. I mean, I imagine there's times people were hitting, half of something fell off, the axe got stuck, and half, like stuff fell out, like whether it's brain or bits, or like somebody catches something to the face and the jaw half hangs off. I'm sure there's all these horrible situations that people see, and as humans, yes, you may become desensitized to it, but I guess you will always take it home with you, and whether it's then or now, PTSD, I imagine, will have existed.
I think so. I think the study of like the psychological costs of war is incredibly fascinating in and of itself, especially in a historical context. We tend to gloss this stuff over a lot, also because in a lot of the like the saga literature, for instance, it's glorified in different ways, or it's turned into jokes. Like I think it's in Gisli's saga, another saga from Iceland, where this guy, he gets an axe in his head. Like he goes towards the woods. The guys are hiding in there to like investigate anybody in there. And then somebody throws an axe out of the woods and like hits him right in the face. And he's like, "Oh, that hurt." It's kind of ridiculous, right? But that's also a way to distance yourself from the violence, like as the spectator, the audience, when you're like reading this stuff and retelling these stories. It was definitely
also gallows humor as well, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. And gallows humor is one of the ways that we as humans can relate to detrimental things and also process, mitigate, and reconcile them in our lives, right? That's what all of this, really comes down to. And PTSD was very much part of the life for these Vikings who went to war and who went on raiding and experienced a lot of bloodshed. Of course it was. I mean, I doubt that many professional soldiers that come back from Afghanistan, for instance, they don't come back with some level of PTSD. I mean,
for sure, because it's not normal is not the right word, but I just don't think that we're made to kill each other like that, especially in such brutal ways, that it is going to leave something with you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's also a thing that you should consider. A lot of studies of like how people react to war and to being in that situation actually have yielded quite some interesting things. Like one of the things is that as human beings, we're quite reluctant to just kill people. Like it takes a lot for at least a normally sane individual to go there, and that's also why, as a modern soldier, you go through a lot of training to be ready to kill. That's the whole point. You're trained to do that, right?
Breaking down all the barriers that are telling you to stop.
Yeah, there's something deep in our psychologies that would otherwise initially prevent us from doing that. Now, then go back to these Vikings back in the day, and yeah, sure, they had a bit of, they definitely, that type of society definitely had some training for warriors in different ways. But whether or not that training really prepared them to do what they needed to do, that's another question. And you can dig a lot into this, how prepared were these people to just commit violent acts like that, and that's a very good question. But yeah, going back to
I was gonna say, I think it's so easy for, especially because we're so far away from the events now. You're talking 1,000 years ago. It's easy to glorify it, and for people to sit on Facebook and to glorify these acts of violence and kind of Vikings are these really cool, savage people, and sometimes you got to take a moment to think back that they are just humans, and these are very vicious, violent acts that are going to stay with people on both sides, whether it's the person doing the killing or the people left behind after the killing. It's, you know, it is history, and you can't, you know, it's enjoyable, but it, at the time, it had a big effect on all sides. They are still humans, and it's so easy to detach yourselves from that and think of it as these people all that way back then who didn't necessarily have feelings and emotions and thoughts.
But that's the thing. I mean, this is also what we see in modern action movies, right? Like Bruce Willis, he's like, he's just fucking around in Nakatomi Tower, right? Killing off Hans Gruber and all the other guys in my favorite Christmas movie.
Oh, you've just upset half the people. Half the people listen to this are like, it's not a fucking Christmas film.
It was decided to be a Christmas film at the Council of Nicaea in 436. There you go. Historians have spoken.
If you watch it at Christmas, it's a Christmas film for me.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so like, I mean, think about all the things that this guy goes through. Like half of the physical toil his body takes. You can't even do that as a human being, and just get up afterwards. At least, like you'd want to lie down for a while.
For sure. But I think also on the flip side of that, sometimes Hollywood makes it look too easy for people to die as well. And I don't think it would have been like that. That's why I think it would be a lot more gruesome and a lot more violent than you realize, because it's not as easy to kill somebody as it is on TV. It's not just like a sword through and they drop dead. You know, these people are fighting for their lives, so they're going to be struggling. There's going to be bits missing. There's going to be last minute gas. You know, it's not this pretty.
No, it's definitely not that pretty. You know, one of I think the most realistic dying scenes that you get from Hollywood movies is actually in that old lame 90s movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. What is it called? The Beach. This movie about, like, you know, it's a movie about the first generation of kids from, you know, Western Europe and the US, like traveling in the globe, right? Trying to find those places where nobody has gone before. And they find this like paradise on an island off the coast of Thailand, where you have to like go through a weed field where like the gangsters are growing marijuana, and then you get on the other side, and then, you know, there's like this hidden cove. And in this movie, like that it's all like paradise, and they have like this nice hippie community, you know, all these things. And then at one point, they're like these two French brothers, and one of them gets bitten by a shark and dies. And that dying scene right there, I think, is very realistic, because like he gets bitten to the extent that he's like slowly bleeding out, and he's and it takes a while. It takes a couple of days, and infections and all this kind of stuff. And that's like the thing that kills the romance for all of them. And they start getting bitter about paradise, and then, you know, they eventually just go back home to their nice cozy Western lives after having been on an adventure, and one of them died. You know, that's how it goes, right? So the story though is like, or this like scene where he's dying and everybody's feeling like they're getting bummed out, dude. And the way that is like portrayed, I think, is incredibly realistic in terms of the horrors of death, and how it comes about, and how it is felt by people. So that's, aside from that, it's a pretty crappy movie, but
yeah, I think one thing that sticks with me when it comes to kind of the violence of war is there was a Joe Rogan podcast episode, and I can't remember the fella's name, and I'll try to remember it. He was a vet from, I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan, and he talks about how he had to go in and like save his team, and it's the most heartbreaking story that you can ever hear. You know, it completely ruined his life, and he talks about how, you know, he's basically on the back of a not a pickup, but like a gun truck, and he's just kind of shooting everything that moves. He's like one with the machine, and he talks about how he crushes a guy's skull with a stone, with like a brick, that there's on the floor. You know, it's just that violence is like it was literally a case of it's me or him, and like one of us has to go. And it's that kind of image. And I mean, I have no shame. I mean, you know, that I was in tears listening to the episode. I downloaded his book, listened to it, and it's so heartbreaking what they go through. And then he speaks about what he goes through after, about how, you know, he's sat in his truck outside his buddy's shop, and he's got a handgun in the glove box, and he's going to kill himself. But thankfully, someone, I think it was his sister, took the bullets out of the gun like a few days before. And it's just like this heartbreaking story of what he goes through and how the PTSD affects him. And having the wonders of having a producer on hand. The fella's name is Dakota Myers, or Dakota Meyer, which is, like I say, the Joe Rogan episode is absolutely amazing. It's heartbreaking. It's definitely worth a listen.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think so. When you see like these dudes who are sitting there on the internet saying like all kinds of like things like how badass they are and glorifying violence and so on, that's usually the guys who have never really been anywhere near it. Some of the people who speak most responsibly about violence that I have ever known have been veterans of war. They know what they're talking about.
Because they've seen it and they've seen what people can do to each other. Yeah, and they know on both sides how haunting it can be.
Yeah.
So back to the story about the the guy in the hut who turns mad, maybe PTSD.
Yes, yeah. So, and by the way, just segue, the story of the meat of poetry, and now that we're talking about violence and all of these things, is actually also the most violent story in Nordic mythology. Like this is the story with most kill counts. Like there are 9 slaves that die, there are other people, and Kvasir dies, and so on. So like alcohol and violence also go together. That is, I think, something that most people know to some extent.
For sure. Yeah.
So Kveldulve has like this bad temper. This is inherited by his son, Skatlagrimr, Egil's father. Skatlagrimr is more, even-minded, and he is the person who's responsible for the family leaving Norway to go to Iceland, and that's because he does not want to fight for, or if he does want, he's reluctant to become an ally of Harald Finehair, right? So that typical story of like, why did people from Norway migrate to Iceland? It was because Harald Finehair was a douchebag, and he was like imposing taxes on them and all of these things. Now, whether or not those aspects of the story are actually true, that's another part. But they eventually then go to Iceland, and Kveldulver, he dies on the journey, and then they put him in a casket. And this is where it's really interesting, because the typical way of taking land in Iceland is that you have to take your high seat pillars from your temple back in Norway, so basically sort of like a totem pole or whatever you want to call it, with carved images of the gods, and you have to like throw it overboard when you come within sight of Iceland, and then let it drift towards Iceland, and wherever it lands, that's where you take land. And so it's sort of like ordained by the gods, right? That's the typical Icelandic land taking story.
Yeah, unless it landed somewhere shit, and then you just move it on a little bit. It's kind of like the guy playing golf. The guy playing golf, when his ball lands in the rough or in the trees, just kind of kicks it out when nobody's looking.
Exactly. And by the way, of course there are people who have tried to reconstruct these rituals, right? Some happy Icelandic scholar in the 19th century being like, yes, we shall try to do this, and then they do that, and then they find that these high seat pillars, they float to Greenland or North America or something, because it doesn't really work that way. But it's a great story, right? The whole purpose of the story is to basically say the gods or divine providence has led us to this country. You find settlers in America who said the same thing, right? So it's a common thing. I
think it gives justification as well, especially if you've dragged 20 people with you to Iceland.
Right.
You know, it's easier to do if you say Odin wills it, or, you know, we're carried here by Thor blessing us with the, you know, good weather to get us here. It makes it a little bit easier for people following you if the gods are with you.
Exactly, and to these medieval Icelanders who were writing about this, they were of course Christians, but they recognized that you know, God could also work through other agents, and that's how it's sort of like okay to like assume that Odin might have been part of that mix. But in the story,
you mean Christianity adapted to suit what he wanted?
Just once in a while, you know, a little bit here and there.
Shock. Never would have thought of that.
So in this story, though, it's Kveldulver who guides them to settle in Iceland. It's not the high seat pillars that come from the temple back in Norway. It's grumpy old grandpa who has been put in a casket, and then they throw it overboard, and then they settle where it lay. The story then, of course, it gives us a couple of clues about how Skallagríma is also a little bit crazy, and this is inherited into Egill as a figure himself. And Egill then goes about becoming, you know, a famous Viking. And one of the ways that he becomes a famous Viking is to kick a lot of ass in Norway. He ends up on the bad side of Eric Bloodaxe, and especially the evil queen Gunhildur. That's sort of like the thing of the story, is they try to avoid talking too much shit on the Norwegian kings, and then putting all the responsibility on the evil queen instead. And there is one situation where she has poisoned the mead at a Dísablot, I think it is, on an island off the coast of Norway. And Egill is sitting there in the crowd. She wants him off because you know, there's still a feud between the royal family and his family, even though that they have moved to Iceland long ago. Eric Bloodaxe, I believe, if I remember this correctly, sent a beautifully silver inlaid adorned axe to Skallagríma, Egil's father, as a way to reconcile them. And Skallagríma was like, fuck him, and I think he threw it out or something like that. Put it on a crossbeam in the smithy or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Ultimate disrespect, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Just like, you know, put it in the shed kind of thing.
Put it in the toilet, in the lavatory. Just hang it up on the wall.
Yeah, no, by the way, that was in Denmark during the occupation in World War II. That was a common thing to do, to put Hitler's picture underneath the lid of the toilet.
There you go. I mean, I can't think of a more deserving place for it.
Right. Anyway, so we go back to Egill, and he finds himself on this island at a so-called Dísablot, depending on which source we're reading, either a spring ceremony or a fall ceremony. It's a little or like a winter ceremony, I guess. It's a little iffy when it actually took place, but I think this one is taking place in the spring. They're on this island, and they are drinking, and this is part of this the celebration that you drink. You're sitting there, and the drinking horn is passing around in the crowd, and Queen Gunhildur has put poison in the mead. And Egill, he gets it, and then he writes some runes on it and speaks a spell, and then it bursts. So that tells you a little bit about his power too, right? He's got some hardcore juju going on here. Okay. And there's like several of these situations where he either, like, you know, creates. He's either like capable of like funky magic, or his character sort of like merges with Odin. So in one instance, he is at this point, if I remember the story correctly, he is working as a tax collector for, I guess that might be Eric Bloodaxe's son, or is it Eric Bloodaxe himself? I can't remember. One of the two. This is in the early 900s, I guess. Anyway, he's working as tax collector for the Norwegian king. The families have been reconciled at this point. This is later into the story. And then he goes to this guy named Armoder, who lives up in the mountains somewhere. Has to, of course, cross a blizzard and all that stuff. And then he comes to the house, and then Armoder treats them to skyr, I think it is, or this like sort of like a watered down yogurt that you can drink. It's like half fermented instead of, giving them the beer. He's a very stingy guy, and that's also part of the whole thing. He doesn't want to pay taxes, right? That's why Egil is there. He's there to collect taxes. Armoder then is giving him that's slop or whatever it is.
So would that be kind of, I guess, a form of disrespect?
Exactly.
Not getting out the good stuff.
That is a very, very like hardcore disrespect. Then they find out that he does have booze, and they're like, "What the fuck, dude?" And he's like, "Okay, well, sure. Here's the beer." And then they start drinking beer, and I think that's how it goes. I mean, it's been a while since I read it, but ultimately, what it comes down to is that they're competitively drinking, and eventually, like, they drink so much that he starts barfing all over the place. But here's what he does. This is the so apparently it's not so you don't lose face apparently by barfing, but only, I guess, if you use it to your advantage. So the barfs in Arboda's face to incapacitate him. Yeah, this is where it gets weird. This is where I think we see that this is another kind of culture than the ones that we're familiar with. And he I
don't know. I've seen videos of people being sick in glasses and then drinking it again. So I'm not going to say it's any more weird than that.
Guess not. No. And ultimately, what he also does is that he punches Armoder in the face so hard that his eye pops out. So that's like a Odin reference right there, like one-eyed. and I think he also like rips off half of his beard, which is a way of taking away his masculinity. So there you have sort of like a drinking contest that also ends in violence, by the way, and like a pretty psychotic outburst from our good friend Egil.
I feel like that's just a sneaky way, kind of like throwing the sand in the eyes.
Yeah.
It seems like the sand is just sick.
Yeah. and like, projectile vomiting sick. Yeah, so that's one situation where you have that competitive drinking, and it is sort of known to be able to handle his drinking. That's something that you see in the story again and again that he does quite well. There's an instance that doesn't have anything to do with drinking, but with war and violence on the other hand. After him and his brother, they enlist in Athelstan's army in England, and they fight, I think, the King of Scots for him. And his brother is killed in a battle, and Egil is pissed off. And he's after the battle, he's sitting across from the king, and he's looking at him across from the fire. And the way that it's described is that he's like he's like doing something with his eyebrow so that like it looks like he only has one eye. So once again, he's sort of like merging with Odin as a character as well. And yeah, so he has those like of course, like the story is full of poetry as well. So he has like these two sides to him: the fine cultural aspect of being capable of creating poetry. He's also, in the sense of that culture at least, cast as a very noble figure. And then he's like a straight up psycho who will barf in somebody's face and then punch him so hard that his eye pops out. So yeah, but
sounds
both
like a
sides
fun.
right there.
Sounds like a fun guy.
He probably was a lot of fun too to go out on town with.
That's it. So to pull it back to the poetry side, and I guess to link it back to me playing Assassin's Creed,
Mhm.
they have these. I guess they're almost like medieval rap battles of two people throwing slurs at each other in poetry form. Now,
Yeah,
is that real? Please tell me that's real.
that is real. That is
Oh,
straight
wow.
up. That is one of the realest aspects of the Viking Age ever. Like
Really?
yeah, absolutely. They would compose poetry that was basically designed to destroy their opponent's honor. That was very common. This is the kind of stuff that you could get outlawed for in Iceland too. If you compose poetry where you accused somebody of being rasrægin, which basically means homosexual.
Okay.
So that then he had the right to kill you just on the spot. But sometimes you would also see that response with similar poetry. Yeah, no, that is a very standard part of the culture at the time. So yeah, medieval rap battles.
I think that's so interesting. But I guess it makes sense, just, and I wonder how often, because I guess, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I've watched a little bit of like battle raps before. And I guess the ultimate thing is to not allow it to bother you so much that you act out in violence. So, like people can say what they want, but you can't take it too far and go and get physical with it. So I wonder if they also had that kind of limit on it where you can't pick up your sword and just kill somebody because it's in kind of like the rules of this engagement of words.
No, that part is not the same. So, to my understanding, I haven't spent a lot of time researching rap, but as far as I understand, rap was actually created to take off the tension of violence, like being able to duke it out through words instead of violence. And sometimes you will definitely see rap beef getting violent, right? I mean, I guess the famous cases are the Tupac and Biggie and all that stuff, right? If that wasn't the feds or whatever weird conspiracy theories are out there, CIA was involved.
Some people say he's still alive.
Oh yeah, he's still alive. He lives in a hut, like actually right over here, hiding in the mountains. No, so there's in the Viking Age, there's a line you can't cross. Apparently, that's that line where you symbolically strips a man of his manliness by and this is where you will see Iceland, as I've said before, is a different type of society, I think, than mainland Scandinavia, insofar as it is very highly competitive. It's much more competitive than when you go to, especially southern Scandinavia, but even also just Western Norway. Because the lines of like who's in charge are much more blurred in Iceland in this period. So we have these prominent families, great warriors, and so on, competing to become the person in charge of their little corner in Iceland, or even Iceland itself. And this is what culminates with the civil war during Snorri Sturluson's lifetime, and with Snorri Sturluson at the center of it. Right, he's one of the people who loses that civil war. But earlier it hasn't like come to a head yet. So you have multiple players, right? And one of the ways that we can see that is that they are so concerned with their honor, and anybody impeding on their honor, anybody saying that they're not manly enough, because if if people can get the message out that you're not manly enough, then there's also a risk that other people will take your stuff, take your your possessions, take your land, kidnap your family. That was a real threat, right?
So it's you can have a war of words, but it's if you push it too far and insult someone's manliness or their honor, I guess if they don't then act in a certain way back, then they're kind of proving the lack of their manliness and their honor. So exactly. I guess you kind of get them tied into a situation where you have to act with violence to restore said manliness.
Exactly. So they were incredibly concerned with that, seemingly. But I don't think that was very much the case in the rest of Scandinavia, to be honest. I think this is a very distinct Icelandic phenomenon, and that's probably also why skaldic poetry and then also all this historical knowledge gets to live so strongly in Icelandic culture, and that's what results in all these awesome sagas being written down and all that stuff. There's no comparable literature elsewhere in northwestern Europe, so Iceland in that case is special, right? So something that I would consider pretty bad cultural traits, a lot of violence and dudes who can't take a joke, it turns into a pretty awesome cultural material then that you have in the literature. So yeah,
there we go. So I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you about before we end this is the Lewis chessmen. I was reading a quite a cool article about this little chess figure that was found from the Isle of Lewis, which is in the Outer Hebrides off the north of Scotland. And this little chess piece is apparently worth £1 million. And somebody found it in their granddad's drawer or something like that and didn't know what it was worth, took it down to the auction house, asked if they knew anything about it. And, apparently
there you go.
It's a Viking age or close to a chess piece made of walrus, I think it is.
Yeah, walrus tusk. They are from, I think there are 14 in total, 14 or 15 of these little chess pieces.
I think I read there's like 6 missing or something.
Yeah, I think there was originally found these 14 or 15. The first one was found pretty early in the 19th century, so it's a long time ago. These things keep popping up in people's drawers here and there. Just like, medieval manuscripts in Iceland, sometimes somebody will go to their grandpa's dilapidated old farm and then find something in a haystack somewhere. It still happens, guys.
So everybody who's listening to this, check your drawers for one of these little figures. We'll put a picture on the Instagram, but we also want 10% finder's fee.
So yes, they're made of walrus tusk, so ivory. And this was one of the primary exports of medieval Norway and Viking Age Norway. It's actually the hunt for walrus might be the thing that brought people to Iceland in the first place. Iceland used to have a population of walrus that these nature-loving Vikings immediately destroyed.
I mean, that's a tale as old as time, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. No. Absolutely. The humans move into an area and then bye animals, except for like mice and geese.
Things that are small enough to get away are useless.
Yes, and it's the same with Greenland. Like the Scandinavian population in Greenland in the Viking Age probably came there because of hunting walrus, because the ivory from the walrus tusk was one of the most prized objects in medieval Europe, and these Lewis figures are made of that tusk. So that's also why it's assumed that they're probably from Norway, originally carved in Norway.
Yeah, I think that was the idea from this article, was that they were saying that the Isle of Lewis was probably used as a stopping point between Norway and Ireland. I think you've said before that it tended to be Norway would go around the north of England down to Ireland, whereas Denmark would come more across
east,
straight to England itself.
Yeah, and at times these Scottish Isles and Scotland itself is also a more or less incorporated into some naval kingdom of a Scandinavian king here and there. So there's a lot of crossover, and it makes perfect sense that these probably Norwegian made artifacts will then show up in the Outer Hebrides.
I guess what I found interesting was that it is very clearly a chessboard.
Mm-hmm.
They are chess pieces, and
Yeah.
I wondered, like, when did that come from? Because I assumed, I might be completely wrong in this, the chess comes from sort of China area or the Far East.
Well,
unless I'm completely wrong with that and I've just made it up.
I don't know much about the history of chess in and of itself. that's one of the corners of history I haven't spent much time on. I mean,
this is where Mike pops up and types it in the chat and lets us know the history of chess.
But I mean, we do have like types of board games, of course, that people have been playing forever in different capacities in Europe, right? I mean, go back to ancient Rome, and you'll find certain board games there. And we have the Hnefatafl as a Scandinavian Viking Age board game that I have very little knowledge about, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. That's the one that I've always seen. It's kind of like a chess board as such. That's what it looks like, but with different pieces. I don't really know how to play it, but it's very different to chess, even though the board looks similar. Which I guess is why I found it quite strange that it was, like I say, it is very much a chess board. I just always assumed that they were separate.
Well, I assume that these Lewis chessmen are actually the earliest example of Scandinavian chess. Like I don't know that there is anything before them that suggests that the Scandinavians were familiar with chess as such. And then, of course, it means that chess did exist in Western Europe at that time. The Scandinavians are probably learning it from the English. That's what I would assume, without having looked more into it, though.
I kind of wondered whether it was from, because like you say, we spoke about before having the Silk Road that goes to obviously to the Far East. So Mike's just come in and said this from India in the 6th century, so it's obviously predates the Viking Age. So that's why I was kind of just wondering, like I say, whether it was on that Silk Road where maybe they picked it up in India.
That's not impossible.
And then brought it back.
Yeah, it could be the Vikings are actually the ones introducing chess into the northwestern corner of Europe. Who knows? I mean, they do go through the Caspian Sea to Central Asia to trade. We do have objects from Central Asia that show up in Scandinavia in the 9th and 10th and 11th centuries. So that fits the bill, so to speak. It's not impossible that they have picked it up, but I would want to ask an expert on games and gameplay in the Viking Age on that before I say much more.
We'll have to find one and then invite them on.
Yeah, I know a guy.
There we go. Perfect. So yeah, I just found that story really interesting. That these little figures popped up. Like I said, firstly, because it was chess, and secondly, they are very much. I think they said one is a berserker. The one that was found was it's a little fellow holding his shield. I think he's biting the shield.
Yeah, no, that's a very characteristic aspect of him, that he's you can see like his upper tooth line on the shield, right, as he's holding it right in front of him, and we have that described in literature as well.
I was going to say, do we know where that comes from? This idea of biting a shield? It seems a little bit odd to me.
No, so this is from Ynglinga saga, the saga of the Ynglings, the prehistory to the Norwegian kings sagas, where this is the story about how Odin is actually, in fact, a king from Turkey. This is also gonna hit some of the white supremacists in the panties, I guess. Who migrates into Scandinavia and sets up shop, right? And we're told a couple of things about Odin and his warriors. And one of the things that they say about him is that his warriors get mad like dogs or wolves or bears or something like that, and then they'll bite their shields. So it's and we also see it mentioned in other sagas here and there. So that's sort of like a standard trope about like, you know, crazy ass warriors who go to war and really kick ass. So it makes perfect sense. Like this chess piece, you know, is largely from the same period of these sagas being either written or composed or created, depending on, you know, a lot of varying factors. But it makes sense that we would see visual depictions of that as well, because this was obviously a thing that was tied to the idea of the powerful warrior as well.
I guess you're probably just showing that savagery, that eager to get into battle, that you're gonna bite your shield.
I guess so. I mean,
it seems an odd thing to me. I mean, I'd probably, but then again, I'd probably just be absolutely terrified, hidden away, crying at the back, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I really don't know how I would personally react in some kind of early medieval war situation. Like that's
no, me neither. Yeah, so you know, this has been fun. Before we wrap up, I guess this is going to be the first episode of the new year, I think. So I don't know if you wanted to take a minute to look back or mention a couple of the most memorable moments from the last year, or anything that stands out for you. I know I have one that stands out.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I would say like this year has been pretty incredible. Like what we've done with this podcast is beyond what I ever thought like would ever happen. Like we've gone from you and me doing podcast episodes every second week or something like that.
I think when we first started, it was kind of whenever we found time. And then we went to every other week, and then lockdown happened, and we were like, "Oh, fuck it, let's just do every week."
Yeah, and
somehow it stuck.
And now we're stuck. Yeah, and yeah, it started out with me editing on my own crappy devices and all that stuff, and then we brought on Shan, who's a great sound producer. And yeah, by the way, those of you who are listening, it is all my fault when the sound is bad. That's because I have poor connection. I live in the mountains.
Yeah. And we found that out last week when we had a meeting and some truths were told.
and now we also have Mike on as a producer and everything, and we're slowly getting more and more professional and figuring stuff out. So
it seems that way, and obviously that's a huge thank you to everyone who supports us on Patreon. Obviously, I mean, me and Mathias do this for free, but we can't ask like the editors, Mike, who sits in on the episodes, produces it, uploads it. You know, he does a lot of work behind the scenes. So these guys obviously need a little bit of money to persuade them to do it. Not everyone has the love and passion, I guess, that me and Mathias have. So, you know, as we get more professional, then it does cost a little bit more money. So, like I say, the guys who support us on Patreon, it means everything, because that's what it allows us to do. And I guess sometimes, you know, as we're going forward, if me and Mathias ever go silent because we can't remember something, it'll usually because we're waiting for Mike, who we now have like the voice of God, who pops up in the chat and will allow us and prompt us with dates and whatnot.
Yeah. No, it's really helpful and really awesome. But yeah, I mean, so go ahead. Yeah,
I was gonna say the podcast. Yeah, like when we first decided to do this, you know, we were just speaking. We'd never even spoken before, except through a very brief interaction over kind of both having a dislike for some comments we got on one of our first posts when we used a non-white model. in a very sort of brief chat. And we were like, let's do a podcast. Fancy it? And somehow we ended up putting it together and then growing it to what it is now. And it seems to have been received really well by people. People hopefully enjoy it. You know, we both get messages quite frequently from listeners saying, you know, we love the show. Thank you for doing it. And it's quite overwhelming to get sometimes.
Yeah, no, and I want to thank everybody who listens. And also I want to thank you all for your comments. Like sometimes I get comments in private messages on various social media, and I don't always have the time to respond. So I just want to like blanket statement for everybody who sends me those messages. Thank you so much. It means a lot, even if I sometimes forget to respond. It also means a lot with all the support we get, and like even some of the more like crank comments are fun or meaningful. Like what was there some guy who was asking if our equipment was also from the Iron Age or something like that.
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely insane when we think, you know, we get thousands of people that listen to this every week, and you know, I'm just, for me anyway, I'm just like this moron who sits here and listens to you talk about cool shit, and I just get to occasionally poke in with maybe a witty or funny comment, or I hope it is, and ask some questions on stuff that I don't understand. It's like, who the fuck wants to listen to that? But apparently some people do.
Well, I mean, you know, there's plenty of experts out there, but most of these experts aren't talking with people. You know,
don't give them any ideas.
Oh no, guys. and I think that's one of the you know, the things that draws people to this. I mean, because I mean personally, I wouldn't necessarily know where to start. Like one of the things about confirmation bias, like we all have it, and you know, just because you're a scholar, you also have you're not like free of confirmation bias in different ways. And one component of confirmation bias is always that you assume that other people know what you know. But that's actually not the case, right? And especially not
that's where I come in.
Spent 10 years studying something. Like, of course, people won't necessarily know the same thing, right? And yeah, that's where you come in and ask those very important and relevant questions that can take me in the direction of like also actually explaining things that people want to hear instead of just like ranting like a madman in a corner over there. I mean, I also do that, but
occasionally I just let you go.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so what is a memorable episode for you? Like anything that we
you know, there's one that stands out, I think, to everybody, which is the Vikings are gay episode, where we suggested they may possibly have been homosexual Vikings. Shock. Which you know, happened to upset fucking so many Viking bros who couldn't grasp the idea that maybe people were gay in the Viking Age.
I mean, I'm just like, we've just talked about how that was an insult. If that was an insult, I'm pretty sure it was also a reality, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know.
For sure. I mean, that episode to me was shocking in a sense that it showed like how many people that still think that way and still have those kind of homophobic thoughts and very small-mindedness, how many there is still about. Because, you know, I surround myself with nice people who don't think like that. So when they kind of pop up, I'm like, fucking hell, as if you even exist. Like, how are you?
Right?
How are you doing anything in 2020 and fucking acting like that?
Yeah. No, I also get really surprised when I run into that. On the other hand, I mean, I'd also say that, yeah, of course, there's a lot of like insecure dudes out there. But dudes, just get over it. Like,
for sure.
Yeah, find a hobby. And then they'll work out.
And I guess the other memorable episodes would be obviously having Einar Selvik on, which, you know, if anybody said when we first started this, you know, by episode like 40 something, you're gonna have Einar on, it'd be like, fucking hell, can't wait for that.
Yeah, no, that was a really great episode. I always love talking to Einar. He's really so knowledgeable, and he you know, as an artist, like I really love the way that he integrates scholarly knowledge into his art. Yeah, that's really cool. I really enjoyed talking with Oliver Tier
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
Faun. That was a really great episode too.
That was good. Yeah, and obviously the Kai episode was really. I feel like we could have spoken to Kai for hours.
Absolutely, yes.
And not touch the same subject. He's definitely one we need to get back on. And to me, one of my personal favorite episodes, I would think would be Emily Lorenzen. I just fucking love that episode, and we had so many nice comments about how that was one of our best episodes. I think it just clicked. It was a really good episode. I enjoyed that. So if you haven't listened to that, I would implore you to take a moment to, because it was a fun. She's a fun girl. You know, it really had a laugh.
Yeah, no, I must admit, I also really enjoyed nerding out in Danish a little bit here and there. I got a couple of comments from the stuff.
I still have no idea what you're saying about me, and I know it was about me. I'm not stupid. Someone will tell me one day.
One day you'll figure it out.
No, somebody will have to tell me. I won't figure it out. No, so this has been, like I said, this has been fun. You know, we really do appreciate everyone that takes the time to download and listen to this. And I guess, as always, if you want to follow us privately or see what we look like, you can, follow us on our private Instagrams. Also, we have the Instagram for the podcast now itself, which is the Nordic Mythology Podcast. My personal one is Daniel_Farrand 1. And obviously, you can follow the company at Horns of Odin as well. Mathias, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, nowadays you can find me on my personal Instagram, Mathias Nordvig. Go give the Nordic Mythology Podcast a like on Facebook. As we said in the beginning, I've changed the name of the page that I had for our Nordic Mythology channel to Nordic Mythology Podcast. So now you can find it there. There's still some of my stuff on it. I don't think we're going to take that off.
No, of course not.
Yeah, so like I think I'll still continue to publish my blog posts and stuff like that if anybody feels interested in reading that. So this will come out after, but just around the new year, I will be posting about Rune Jan Rasmussen's Nordic animist calendar. I'm doing a review of that and very much looking forward to publishing that. So look out for that if you haven't already found it. Now that we're in the new year, I guess once this episode comes out.
Fucking hell, it's like Inception, or I guess
totally
talking in the future. So if you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a positive review and a 5-star rating. Like I say, it does help people find it, helps people, if they're unsure whether to download it, reading a good review will always maybe help them or persuade them to download it and give us a try. If you do want to support us financially, then we do have our Patreon, which is Patreon/Nordic Mythology Podcast. Obviously, every little helps with that. It helps us, keep growing, getting better equipment. I really need to get a better camera because I just look white as a ghost on this every week. It makes me feel sick. So yeah, thank you very much to everyone for listening, and take care.
Yeah, thank you so much.